5 years ago, 19-year-old Rebecca Martinez disappeared after attending a spiritual retreat in the mountains of Northern California. Her older brother David has been searching ever since, following dead-end leads and false hopes. But when he finally tracks down the Covenant of Divine Light compound, he discovers Rebecca isn't just missing, she's been transformed into someone he doesn't recognize. And the sect's charismatic leader has been using his followers' children and finances for purposes that go far beyond spiritual enlightenment. David Martinez gripped his binoculars, staring through morning fog at wooden gates that read, "Covenant of Divine Light, Private Property." 5 years of searching had led to this moment. 50 adults, 15 children, and somewhere inside, his sister Rebecca. The breakthrough had come through Elena Vasquez, a cult survivor he'd met at a support group. "I remember Rebecca," Elena had whispered over coffee. "Pretty girl, dark hair, they transferred her to California for spiritual elevation." Now David sat in his rental car, recording equipment hidden in his jacket, GPS tracker synced to his friend Mike 20 miles away. The compound looked deceptively peaceful. Log buildings scattered through forested acres, people working gardens, children playing in supervised groups. A man approached as David parked. 50s, silver hair, commanding presence despite simple clothing. "Welcome, brother. I'm Joseph Stern, spiritual guide for our community. You must be David Martinez." David's blood chilled. They knew he was coming. "How do you know my name?" "Your sister Rebecca told us you might come. She's been praying for your spiritual awakening." Joseph's blue eyes held calculating coldness beneath surface warmth. "She's at afternoon meditation, but she'll be excited to see you." Inside the main building, David studied framed photographs lining the hallway, community members gardening, cooking, praying, all wearing identical expressions of serene contentment that seemed artificial, rehearsed. "Here she is," Joseph said, stopping beside a photo that broke David's heart. Rebecca, but transformed. White dress, severe hairstyle, gaunt face wearing vacant serenity. Nothing remained of the passionate, argumentative girl who'd called him daily from college. She looks different, at peace. Rebecca discovered that material relationships prevented divine consciousness. She's found her true purpose as a vessel for divine love. Something in Joseph's tone made David's skin crawl, like discussing a successful project rather than a human being. Joseph led David to a sitting room and began a practiced recruitment speech about divine purpose, spiritual evolution, and worldly corruption. His voice was hypnotic, manner persuasive. David recognized the manipulation techniques Elena had warned him about. "Rebecca came seeking truth," Joseph continued. "Here she's found her calling bearing children for spiritual evolution. 2 beautiful daughters raised communally, free from selfish family attachments." David gripped his chair arms. "Rebecca has children? 2 daughters growing up without psychological damage from exclusive relationships, children of the community rather than individual parents." His sister had been turned into a breeding tool, her children raised without maternal bonds. "I want to see Rebecca now," David said through clenched teeth. Joseph led him across the courtyard toward laundry lines where women worked in mechanical silence. Children played in a fenced area under supervision, their movements subdued and overly structured. "Rebecca," Joseph called. A woman turned around. David's heart shattered. Rebecca looked like a ghost, gaunt face, distant eyes. When she saw David, no recognition flickered, no emotion at all. "Hello," she said politely, greeting a stranger. "Becca, it's me, David, your brother." Rebecca looked to Joseph for permission before responding. "That's wonderful. I hope you'll consider joining us in divine purpose." Her voice was flat, rehearsed. The passionate girl he'd known was gone, replaced by this hollow echo. "Becca, don't you remember? I'm your brother. I've been searching for 5 years. Mom died waiting for you." Something flickered in Rebecca's eyes. Pain, confusion. But Joseph's hand touched her shoulder, and her expression smoothed blank. "I have no family outside the community. My spiritual family provides all necessary love." As Joseph led him away, David noticed Rebecca's hand move to touch a small scar on her wrist, an old childhood injury. She only touched it when upset or scared. Somewhere inside the compliant cult member, the real Rebecca was still fighting. That evening, David studied his notes in his motel room. The compound showed classic cult signs: authoritarian leadership, family isolation, financial exploitation, systematic abuse. Joseph sat at dinner's head while women served like servants. Pregnant women looked malnourished despite abundant food for male leadership. Most disturbing were the children, 15 kids showing no attachment to particular adults, speaking in rehearsed phrases, displaying emotional flatness, suggesting systematic abuse. A knock interrupted his research. Through the peephole, he saw a young woman in simple clothing, nervously checking over her shoulder. "Please," she whispered, "I need to talk about Rebecca Martinez." David let in Sarah, recognizing her from the laundry group, early 20s, pale and malnourished like other female members. "I've been in the community 3 years," Sarah said, sitting heavily. "Rebecca and I have been trying to find escape routes. Rebecca wants to leave. Part of her. But it's complicated. They use drugs, psychological techniques, threats against children. Rebecca has 2 daughters, Emma and Grace. Joseph told her she'd never see them if she tries leaving." Sarah explained the community's true structure. Joseph controlled everything through isolation, financial dependence, psychological manipulation, and threats. New members signed over assets. Sarah had surrendered a $200,000 inheritance from her grandmother. "Joseph targets vulnerable people," Sarah continued. "Recent losses, addiction struggles, family isolation. He found me at grief counseling after my parents died. The recruitment process started wonderfully. Love, belonging, answers to life's questions. Gradually, isolation from outside contacts began. Phone monitoring, internet restrictions, mail control. The community became your entire world. For women, divine purpose eventually means bearing Joseph's children. Rebecca resisted initially, kept talking about her brother, but after 6 months of isolation and spiritual counseling, she broke. That's when Emma was born." Sarah pulled out a notebook filled with handwritten entries. "Rebecca and I have been documenting everything: financial records, psychological techniques, child abuse evidence." David studied pages mixing Rebecca's and Sarah's handwriting, months of systematic observation, financial records showing member contributions, funding Joseph's luxury lifestyle, detailed accounts of psychological abuse, breaking down individual identity, evidence that children were being alienated from mothers and subjected to inappropriate sexual education. This could destroy the entire operation, David realized. But we can't leave with the children. Joseph's psychological control is so complete, they'd resist going with their own mothers. Sarah handed David a small key, storage unit in town with documentation copies. "If something happens to us, get this evidence to authorities." "When is Joseph planning to move the community?" "Soon. Maybe weeks. He says the current location is contaminated by worldly influences. Your visit spooked him." For the first time, Sarah smiled. "Your sister never stopped fighting. She just learned to fight differently." David spent the night reviewing 3 years of documentation Rebecca and Sarah had compiled. The storage unit contained notebooks, photographs, audio recordings, and financial documents, painting a comprehensive picture of systematic abuse. Financial evidence was staggering. Joseph had collected over $3 million from new members in 5 years, money supposedly supporting community but funding his personal luxury lifestyle. Bank records showed offshore transfers, expensive vehicle purchases, and payments to shell companies laundering cult income. Psychological abuse was even more disturbing. Rebecca had documented Joseph's manipulation techniques with psychological precision: sleep deprivation, nutritional deficiency, social isolation, sexual exploitation, all designed to break down individual identity and create complete dependence. Most heartbreaking were Rebecca's entries about Emma and Grace. She'd recorded conversations where Joseph told the girls their mother was just one caregiver among many, that individual attachment was spiritually selfish. At 4 and 2, both girls showed severe attachment disorder signs. Audio recordings captured spiritual counseling sessions where Joseph systematically destroyed members' family connections. "Your brother represents your old self," Joseph's voice said, clearly addressing Rebecca. "The selfish part seeking meaning in material relationships. To evolve spiritually, you must embrace your true purpose as divine love's vessel." David heard Rebecca's responses, initially resistant, then confused, finally accepting. Like listening to his sister's personality being disassembled and rebuilt. Child abuse evidence was most damning. Joseph systematically groomed children for sexual exploitation, using religious doctrine to normalize inappropriate adult-child relationships. Teenage girls were designated spiritual brides who would bear children upon reaching puberty. David called his friend Mike, who connected him with FBI agent Lisa Chen, specializing in criminal organizations operating under religious cover. Classic destructive cult operation, Agent Chen said after reviewing documentation. Problem is legal protections and experienced attorneys exploiting religious freedom laws. The evidence is overwhelming. Fraud, child abuse, psychological torture, all needs court admissibility and witnesses willing to testify. Cult members are notoriously unreliable because they're psychologically conditioned, protecting abusers. Agent Chen explained successful cult prosecution required extensive investigation and multiple victim cooperation, potentially months or years David didn't have. However, if children face immediate danger, we can move quickly. Child protection laws allow removing kids first, worrying about prosecution later. The evidence showed systematic child abuse and sexual exploitation grooming. We need social workers and law enforcement assessing children's safety. If your sister's documentation is accurate, we should remove kids immediately and arrest Joseph on endangerment charges. That evening, Joseph called unexpectedly. David, I've been thinking about yesterday's conversation. I believe you're experiencing spiritual awakening. I'd like inviting you to stay with us exploring your divine purpose, either recruitment attempt or surveillance. Either way, an opportunity. When would be convenient? Tomorrow afternoon. We're having a special ceremony celebrating community members' spiritual growth. Very enlightening. After hanging up, David called Agent Chen. This could be our opportunity. If I can document activities during this ceremony, it might justify immediate intervention. Based on your sister's evidence, probably something involving children. Many cult leaders use religious ceremonies normalizing abuse and reinforcing control. David spent that night preparing recording equipment Agent Chen provided, memorizing compound layout, reviewing emergency signals for triggering law enforcement intervention. Most importantly, he studied Rebecca's psychological profile of Joseph, classic narcissistic sociopath, using religious authority justifying complete control over others' lives. Joseph believes he's literally divine, Rebecca had written, convinced normal moral and legal standards don't apply because he's carrying out God's will, extremely dangerous because he has no empathy and no recognition. His actions are wrong. Tomorrow would determine if Rebecca's evidence and David's determination could free her and other victims from Joseph's control. But confronting a sociopathic cult leader surrounded by armed followers and psychologically controlled victims was incredibly dangerous. The ceremony might be David's rescue opportunity or a trap making him the cult's next victim. David returned to the compound, heart pounding as he drove through familiar gates. More people were visible, anticipation in the air feeling ominous rather than celebratory. Joseph greeted him with the same warm smile, but David noticed armed guards positioned around the perimeter, either paranoia about outside threats or planning something requiring security. The ceremony took place in a large building David hadn't seen previously. The entire community was assembled, 50 adults, 15 children, all wearing simple white clothing. Atmosphere was tense, despite religious decorations and soft lighting. Seated in the front row, David had a clear view, but felt exposed and trapped. Joseph stood beside an altar decorated with candles and religious symbols. Today, we celebrate spiritual elevation of community members achieving new divine consciousness levels, Joseph announced. These blessed individuals will demonstrate commitment to our sacred mission. David watched in horror as Joseph called forward several teenage girls, including 2 who couldn't have been older than 14. He spoke about their spiritual maturity and readiness to fulfill their divine purpose as vessels for the next generation. The ceremony was essentially a mass wedding between Joseph and underage girls, disguised as religious ritual. David was witnessing systematic child sexual abuse presented as holy sacrament. Using Agent Chen's recording equipment, David documented everything. Evidence crucial for prosecution and establishing children were in imminent danger, justifying immediate law enforcement intervention. During the ceremony, David made eye contact with Rebecca in the women's section. Her carefully controlled expression slipped momentarily, revealing the real Rebecca, terrified, desperate, but still fighting. She gave an almost imperceptible nod, confirming readiness for whatever rescue attempt he'd planned. After the ceremony, Joseph approached with several male followers. "Brother David, I sense you're troubled by today's witness. Perhaps you need spiritual counseling. understanding the divine nature of our work. Realizing he was about to be subjected to the same psychological manipulation used on Rebecca and others, David decided to play along while gathering more evidence. "I'm having trouble understanding how young girls can be ready for such responsibility," David said carefully. "Age is a material concept," Joseph replied smoothly. "Spiritual maturity transcends physical development. These blessed young women have achieved divine consciousness, making them ready to fulfill sacred purpose." In a private room, Joseph began earnest recruitment. David recognized techniques Rebecca had documented: love bombing, doubt isolation, gradual introduction of increasingly extreme beliefs. Knowing what Joseph was doing made resistance easier. "Your sister has told me so much about you," Joseph said. "She's concerned about your spiritual development, worried that worldly attachment prevents achieving divine purpose." Rebecca said that. "Rebecca has grown tremendously with us. She's learned true love means wanting what's best for someone's spiritual evolution, even if it means letting go of selfish attachments." David felt sick realizing how completely Joseph had perverted Rebecca's family love, turning it into a weapon against her psychological resistance. As evening progressed, David understood Joseph's operation's full scope: not just money and sexual exploitation, but pathological need for complete human control. He'd created a closed system where he was literally worshipped as divine, victims competing for his approval. Around midnight, Joseph revealed true intentions. "David, I believe you're here for a reason. Your sister has been praying for your spiritual awakening for years. You're meant to join our community permanently. What would that involve? Complete commitment. Sign over worldly assets, sever outside contact, dedicate yourself entirely to our spiritual mission. In return, you would find true peace and divine purpose." David realized he was being recruited not just as a new member, but as replacement for members Joseph planned to eliminate. The cult leader was preparing to purify his community by removing anyone showing resistance or disloyalty signs. "I need time to consider such a big decision." Joseph's expression hardened. "Time is luxury we don't have, brother. The community is preparing for spiritual evolution's new phase. Those not ready to commit fully will be left behind." David's phone buzzed with Agent Chen's emergency signal. Law enforcement was moving in. The compound erupted in chaos as FBI agents and sheriff's deputies surrounded buildings. Joseph's guards shouted orders, community members scattered in confusion and terror. Joseph grabbed David's arm, spiritual benevolence mask completely gone. "You're working with them," he snarled. "You betrayed us." "I'm saving my sister and those children from a psychopath who's been abusing them for years," David shot back. Joseph reached for a hidden gun, but David tackled him before he could fire. They fought desperately while gunshots echoed outside and people screamed. Agent Chen burst through the door as Joseph broke free and aimed at David. "FBI, drop your weapon." Joseph spun toward Agent Chen, but she was faster. Her shot caught him center mass, and he collapsed beside the altar where he'd been marrying children hours earlier. Outside, law enforcement systematically secured the compound and evacuated victims. David ran toward women's quarters, searching for Rebecca among the chaos. He found her in the children's building, holding Emma and Grace protectively while other mothers calmed terrified kids. When Rebecca saw David, her carefully constructed emotional barriers finally collapsed. "David," she sobbed, still clutching her daughters. "I knew you'd come. I never stopped believing you'd find me. I'm here, Becca. You're safe now. All of you." As paramedics and social workers began caring for victims, David held his sister and nieces he'd never met, finally understanding the real Rebecca had been fighting to survive inside Joseph's psychological prison for 5 years. 6 months after the FBI raid, David sat in a residential treatment facility's visitor lounge, watching Rebecca play with Emma and Grace in the children's area. The girls were slowly learning to trust their mother's love and form healthy attachments, but the process was gradual and heartbreaking. "The hardest part," Rebecca told David during weekly visits, "is realizing how much of their early childhood I missed because Joseph convinced me loving them was selfish." Rebecca had been diagnosed with complex PTSD, common among long-term cult survivors. Treatment involved intensive therapy, addressing systematic psychological abuse, plus parenting counseling to rebuild healthy relationships with her daughters. "Dr. Martinez says it'll take years to fully process what happened," Rebecca continued, but I'm finally remembering who I was before Joseph and learning who I want to become now. Federal prosecution of the Covenant case resulted in convictions for dozens of crimes: tax evasion, fraud, child abuse, human trafficking. Joseph's death during the raid prevented his trial, but lieutenant leaders received lengthy prison sentences. More importantly, the case led to new federal legislation, strengthening religious organization oversight and providing better cult survivor protections. Rebecca's meticulous documentation had been crucial in securing convictions and helping other victims. "The other women are doing better too," Rebecca reported. "Sarah's in a program in Oregon. 3 others are reuniting with their families. It's amazing how strong people can be once they're free from psychological control." David had used his experience to become an advocate for cult survivors, working with families searching for missing relatives and helping law enforcement understand manipulation techniques used by predatory groups. "I keep thinking about all the time we lost," David said, watching his nieces play with toys they'd never been allowed as children in the compound. "We didn't lose time," Rebecca corrected. "Joseph stole it, but we got each other back. Emma and Grace are learning what real love looks like, and I'm learning how to be their mother instead of just another caregiver." Rebecca had started studying psychology again, planning to specialize in trauma recovery and cult deprogramming. "I want to help other people who've been through what I experienced. I understand the psychological damage in ways that textbooks can't teach." The treatment facility had become like a second home to David, who visited twice weekly and had developed relationships with other survivors and their families. He'd learned that recovery from cult involvement was a long process requiring professional support, family patience, and tremendous personal strength. The worst part, Rebecca had told him during one of their sessions, wasn't the abuse itself. It was losing the ability to trust my own thoughts and feelings. "Joseph made me believe that everything I'd valued before, my education, my family relationships, my independence, was spiritually harmful." But gradually, with therapy and David's unwavering support, Rebecca was reclaiming her identity and rebuilding her life. She'd started making decisions for herself again, expressing opinions, even arguing with David occasionally, something that filled him with joy because it meant his sister's personality was returning. "I have something for you," Rebecca said during one visit, pulling out a small notebook. "I kept a journal during the worst times, when I thought I might forget who I really was. I want you to read it." David opened the notebook and found pages of his sister's handwriting, not the mechanical documentation she'd created as evidence, but personal reflections on maintaining sanity and hope in an impossible situation. "I remember David teaching me to think critically," one entry read. "Joseph wants us to accept everything without question, but David always said the most important question is why. I'm going to keep asking why, even if I can only do it silently." Another entry: "Emma smiled at me today when no one was watching. Joseph says individual attachment is selfish, but that smile felt like the most sacred thing in the world. I don't care if loving my daughter is spiritually wrong, it's the only thing that feels right." Reading his sister's secret thoughts from her darkest period, David understood that Rebecca had never been completely broken. Some core part of her had resisted Joseph's control and preserved the values and relationships that defined her true self. "You saved yourself," David told her. "I just helped you escape." "We saved each other," Rebecca replied. "You never gave up searching, and I never gave up believing you'd find me." As they prepared to leave the facility for one of Rebecca's supervised outings, a major milestone in her recovery, David reflected on how much their relationship had changed. They'd always been close, but surviving trauma together had created a bond that felt unbreakable. Emma and Grace were slowly learning to call Rebecca Mama instead of using her first name as they'd been taught in the compound. They were also learning that having preferences, expressing emotions, and forming attachments were healthy rather than spiritually dangerous. The healing process would continue for years, but David finally felt confident that his family would survive their ordeal. Rebecca was becoming herself again. Her daughters were learning to be children, and together they were building something Joseph had tried to destroy. A family based on genuine love, rather than psychological control. Looking at Rebecca pushing Emma and Grace on swings in the facility's playground, David saw not victims of a cult, but survivors who had found their way back to each other. The covenant of divine light was gone, but the bonds between family members who truly loved each other had proven stronger than any form of manipulation or abuse. Some searches end with rescue, others end with recovery. David's search for Rebecca had become both, and proved that even the most sophisticated psychological prison couldn't permanently destroy the connections between people who refused to give up on each other.